Hello, my name is Tamal Pilla with the Center for Presidential History at SMU. Joined today by Dr. Blake Earle. Dr. Earle is an assistant professor in the Department of Liberal Studies at Texas A&M University, Galveston. And he's a former CPH postdoctoral fellow remind me, Dr. Earle?
When I was a postdoc,
Yes, sir.
I was a postdoc from 2017 to 2019.
Yeah, beautiful. Right after your PhD.
Yeah.
Now you're going to be joining us April 18th on campus, 6 p.m. McCord Auditorium, to discuss your book, The Liberty to Take Fish, Atlantic Fisheries and Federal Power in 19th-Century America, published by the Cornell University Press. Dr. Earle, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So the first thing, and I think this is kind of an obvious question, maybe, but there aren't a whole lot of historians of fish, as far as I know. It's not the most common topic of study. I'm just curious, what attracted you to that? How far back does that interest in fish and fisheries go? And what kept you on that path?
Well, I don't have any kind of real deep-seated, passion for fish or fisheries. Honestly, I came to this topic because I needed something to write my dissertation about. So, yeah, in my first couple semesters of graduate school is really when I hit on this topic because I was looking at this particular incident in the summer of 1852 when the United States and Great Britain are really going after each other diplomatically over something related to the fisheries, and that really kind of piqued my interest because, after all, why do you have all of these diplomats really raising their hackles about fish? And I guess it was kind of the oddity of the subject that really attracted me to it and kept my interest of it because throughout the whole process of writing the dissertation, researching it, turning it into a book, I was just kind of constantly driven by this question of how can fish be so important? How can we use this uh, perhaps seemingly insignificant commodity to tell a much larger, much more important story. And, something that I found in the research and in writing the book is that it is far from insignificant, that we can use fishing in the North Atlantic to tell this really important story about the United States and about American statecraft during the 19th century.
Yes. I was actually going to pull out like an exact quote from the book, but I think you summed it up really well. Is the point in the introduction that you make is the rest of the book is well positioned as a study of fisheries, to study American statecraft. I'm curious why that is. What makes the study of fisheries unique in that way? And why do you feel like maybe it's not as commonly studied as other lenses?
Yeah, well, I think to understand why Americans during the 19th century were so, or at least, politicians, diplomats, those sorts of people were so invested, so interested in the fisheries, I think there's a couple explanations for it. One is just the economic impact of the industry. Fishing was a lot bigger business during the 19th century, so naturally it garnered the attention of, diplomats and politicians who wanted to protect this economic resource that Americans had. But I also think there's kind of a less tangible reason of why these Americans were so invested in the fisheries. And that's because for many Americans across this period, the fisheries were a symbol of independence. Because when the United States and Great Britain negotiated the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War, the Treaty of Paris in 1783, one of the articles in the treaty directly addressed the fisheries and gave Americans the liberty to take fish in the waters of the North Atlantic that Americans had fished for decades before that. So here we have this episode that right at the birth of the United States, there is this direct connection between independence and the fisheries. And so for subsequent decades, access to those fisheries, access to that economic resource became this kind of symbol of American independence, became this way that Americans were able to define themselves as an independent people, define the United States as an independent nation. So while Americans are, working to defend this economic resource, it's also this defense of independence. And of course, for much of the 19th century, there were still legitimate questions about the survival of the United States. So this kind of obsession with maintaining independence was just far more palpable during this period than in later periods when the fishery issue frankly becomes less important. But I think for these early Americans in the 19th century, fishing and independence, fishing and liberty were one and the same, which I think goes part of the way of explaining why subsequent generations of Americans were so keen on defending this resource from any kind of British or other foreign encroachment.
Yeah. Um, uh, so obviously, Dr. Earl, we're the Center for Presidential History, and you were even a postdoc here a few years back. How does this book or this study tie back into the executive branch, the executive office? What role did the president play in this statecraft, in this diplomacy with Britain?
Right. Yeah. Great question. Bringing us back to the reason we're all here, the focus on the presidency and the executive branch. Well, of course, constitutionally, as the president is, the chief diplomat of the nation, the executive branch, played this really key role in how the negotiations unfolded across the century. Because it's not as though the United States and Great Britain, left the issue alone after the Treaty of Paris. Fishing rights were constantly renegotiated across the 19th century. There are multiple treaties coming in, of course, 1783, 1818, 1854, in which the executive branch, the Secretary of State, is leading the way on defending or elaborating or shifting the geopolitical context there. So there is this kind of constant concern um, in Washington coming from the White House about maintaining access to these fisheries. And something else that I found intriguing about this topic is just how consistent uh, subsequent presidential administrations from a variety of political parties were in defending this right. I mean, there's Federalist presidents, there's Whig presidents, there's Democratic presidents across these many decades who all are invested in this project. So across this period here, the fisheries issue is pretty durable in Washington politics as presidents from various political parties, various political ideologies are invested in this project of defending this right.
Sweet. Okay, great. Let's take a step away from the book itself because I want people to be able to come to your lecture and hear a little bit more about it in person. I'm curious though, because this started as a dissertation, right at the end of your PhD at Rice, I think it was in 2017. What inspired you to turn this from a dissertation into a book? Did you have a target audience in mind? Did you have a goal in mind, or was that kind of just the natural next step?
Part of it is the natural next step in this business, and I would say certainly my target audience for the book are fellow academic historians here. That it's just kind of the natural progression in this business as one's first book is generally aimed at one's colleagues. But as I was writing this book, I did, I do harbor some hope that this is a story that will resonate beyond professional academic historians like myself, because I think what I'm doing in this book is, telling this important undertold story that is pretty central to understanding how the United States has developed. I don't think I'm kind of overstepping my argumentative bounds too much here by saying that a point I put forward in the book, and a point that I think I prove, is that understanding how the United States developed, how the federal government developed across the 19th century, we can't understand it independent of the fisheries issue. And I think that is a story that anybody who's interested in American history, who's interested in how the federal government has developed, interested in how the executive branch has developed, um, will find some interest in that story here. Because I think the point I make in the book is that the history of the U.S. and the fisheries issue are inseparable during the 19th century. If we want to understand one, we need to understand the other, and that's a story, that's a topic that I think can find interest in a wider audience.
Cool. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that. How is it, sort of as an academic, that you, I mean, American history is not, it's not unpopular, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's studying American history. Um, how is it kind of venturing into this point where you're saying, guys, there's this whole other issue that's not insignificant, that I think a lot of people are ignoring. It's especially in a time where American history is so well studied. How do you approach that in a pretty dense field of research and say there's all of this over here that you guys aren't seeing? How does that go?
So something that I've done uh, with this book, and I think it's just something that this topic kind of lends itself to, is that the fisheries issue does not exist isolated from other, perhaps more well-studied topics in American history. Because throughout the book, I try to tie the fisheries issues to some of the biggest developments in American history, from the origins of federalism to the development of the Commerce Department to the operation of the United States Navy, even to the politics of slavery. So some of these kind of bigger picture type questions and issues and stories that is perhaps more common in how more people understand the history of the United States. I think the fisheries issue does connect into a lot of those different things. That the fisheries issue is not this isolated thing, but instead it has this connection, has this relationship to these much bigger and these much wider stories.
Yeah, cool. Now, my final question is one that I ask pretty much all of our interviewees, and it's one that I really love. Because as you know, SMU is full of finance majors, it's full of engineering majors, arts majors. Um, but you're coming to campus April 18th to talk about fisheries, right? So the question is, how would you pitch your talk to maybe a finance major or a mechanical engineering major or a vocal performance major who otherwise has no interest in fisheries, let alone American history? What sort of value add is there at your talk or even in your book?
That is a great question. Um, so I think when, talking to these other, hypothetical attendees coming from other disciplinary backgrounds, coming with various interests, I think there are, some aspects of this story that could appeal to each one of these. So if we, if we're talking to this hypothetical engineer, a not unimportant theme in the book, in this study, is one about how changing technology has had a big influence on this story. Certainly, how people fished in the 1780s was different than how people fished in the 1870s, and how those technologies have changed over that time has had an impact on this larger story that I'm looking to tell here. Because an important thing that this book does is not just look at the fisheries issue from the perspective of diplomats and politicians and these elite level policymakers, but instead it looks to tell this story from the perspective fishermen, people who are on the ground or on the water looking to devise solutions to the problems that they came across in, attempting to catch more and more fish. And there is this clear kind of technological evolution in the kinds of gear, the kinds of fishing equipment that fishermen employed here. And, perhaps that could, inspire some consideration by this hypothetical engineer to think about how they go about their own work. How about they how do they go about devising these sorts of technological solutions to the problems that we face today? And as I've alluded to earlier, there is, of course, a kind of a larger economic side to this. So your hypothetical finance major may be able to take away something about the role of fishing, or just the role of resource extraction and the kind of economic side of that, how that influences the political arena. So there may be a little bit of an economic story we could tell there. The performance arts major you're talking about, I'm a little less sure what they would take away from this topic, but I do have a few political cartoons in there, so there's a little bit of
There you
artistic
go.
in that regard.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Well, Dr. Earl, thanks for taking the time. This is awesome. I'm really pumped to see you on April 18th, as I'm sure the rest of the audience is. So as a reminder, April 18th, 6 p.m., McCord Auditorium. I'm excited to be there. Thank you, Dr. Earl.